I think what's interesting about this thread that we're now, I mean, thinking about the research that you're doing, Anakwa, about the forgotten past of Black people in Mexico, and thinking about what we're here to talk about, which is books, and trying to connect it to what we were discussing earlier, which was revisiting this history of radical, intellectually driven South African left-wing critique. I mean, this is a question to, I suppose, both of you in a way, which is that thinking about the work that a publication like Africa as a Country tries to do and what attracted you to Africa as a Country, Anakwa, and thinking about the publication world as a whole. I mean, is it a matter of, I don't know how to put this question exactly, but when we think of, for example, maybe someone wants an African version of The Nation so that they can read intelligent thinkers there, does it feel like the work of a lot of African publications in many ways is first to try and sort of recover these forgotten pasts, to sort of say, we don't need to have these new critiques because a lot of the problems are recurring and there are people that were there in the past who've already said a bunch of things. Let us remind you about them. So, I mean, I don't know where this question is going, and Sean and Anakwa, you can jump in here, but think about Africa as a Country. The history of this organization was a lot of its early work, that work of saying, remember this person, remember this publication, remember this, that. And how does that fit in with like thinking about African publishing and African magazines and so on?
Yeah. So before I get to the actual question, two quick things, because I don't want us to create some erasure. One, that there is a lot of people of Afro descent in Mexico who have documented and continue to document that work. But it's like the other erasure is that Sean spoke about transition as if it's not still in existence. It still is. It's a different product. It's a different
Right. I didn't want to say that. I'd rather let you say it. I don't want to say that.
How is it a different product? I don't know how it's a different product.
It went, so basically it had a controversial history, like where it after the 1960s, by the end of the 1960s, there was a scandal about how the US government had surreptitiously, I'm going to use my language very carefully, funded projects while the projects didn't know that they were being funded. So a lot of projects got sort of discredited. And I think what happened to transition at that point is that it didn't necessarily die, but it just kind of like faded away. And then it was resurrected by Henry Louis Gates at Harvard. And he brought in like a new team, and some of these names are very familiar, like Kele Fasane, who I think ended up working at the New York Times, was part of that moment. The thing you see on the internet on our screen now, that's a different moment of this journal. And Michael Vasquez, and again, that was another great moment of that magazine. I think if they produced one issue, which I have here at home, I think it was the 200 issue, where they put all the best essays into this one issue, and it's another one of the sort of the best stuff that came out in, like, I would say, like the early 90s through sort of the mid to late 90s. And then I think that one sort of petered out, and now it's a different magazine again. I haven't been reading it much, and this is no comment on the magazine, but I think it's a very different magazine. I don't know what you were going to say about it, Anakwa.
No, you said everything. But to Will's question, I think a lot of the part of the tragedy of the continent is that in thinking about this is connected to thinking about our coverage of books to some extent, because a lot of the initial in the 60s, a lot of the presses or the publications that existed were ones which were focused specifically on the priorities of colonialism. So whether it be missionary books or books which were for like technical instructions for industries, etc. And this is not to say that we don't. Obviously, we have a rich culture, rich history, rich tradition, which has been preserved in many ways. But it feels that a lot of intellectual work on the African continent is kind of digging and going back and trying to pull past histories and connect them to present insights. And so I don't know if this is answering your question, but but I see something like Africa as a country as focusing on that rather than say coming out with a piece which is about we found this new octopus on the coast of South Tome.
You're making a comment about the octopus movie now.
Which I'm just giving that example because a lot of the sort of Western magazines of ideas, I think maybe you might disagree with me, but have the luxury to kind of really go out there, really kind of explore and really think through new existences and new things. Whereas we're doing the same thing, but in a kind of in politics, in history, and in trying to understand our societies. I don't know. I mean, Sean, you're the guy who runs this.
I totally agree with you. A lot of my obsession has always been to say there's a usable past that is not, we don't have to act like we reinventing the wheel. There is a usable past, like where people have tried to reimagine or imagine like other kinds of futures. There's something about bringing that to people again. So, for example, we've published critical articles about Sankara, Kizerbo. We've run articles about Rawlings, like the kind of the problematic or complicated politics of the legacy of, say, Jerry Rawlings. Like I want. That's why I think Africa as a country, can play a role. It can help people with those kind of histories. And for the present, I think it's about you're right. There's a way in which Africa plays a role in the struggles that people are having in North America. Like they're having struggles among themselves, and then Africa is a foil. So Africa is not a real place. It's highly idealized. It's either highly idealized or it's complete Afro-pessimism.
It's like we're doing both at the same time.
It's not a real place. It's not a real place. And so I think what Africa as a country wants to do is to say, in the past, it was a real place and people try to imagine things. And a lot of the partners that we bring in who've run articles for us, the post-socialism group, etc., the series that we've edited is to try and do that. Currently, we have a series on psychiatry in Africa after Fanon. Because one of the issues, for example, with psychiatry is to only write about psychiatry as if, and it's great, Fanon was great, but Fanon was psychiatry. And we're saying, no, there's like a lot of other stories, like the one we ran recently about J.C. Carruthers and the Mau Mau in what he had said about the Mau Mau and about Black people and their mental state. And then we showed actually that Fanon was in the debate with him. So, those are the kind of things that I think Africa as a country wants to do. I think we're publishing, you are correct, that we're publishing what we said about these journals of ideas, publishing shared some of these same problems in Africa. You're right, it was the missionaries, then it was the state. And then, of course, Africa went through the crisis of the structural adjustment, neoliberalism. And so where something existed, there's nothing. And so if you talk about publishing in Africa now, I think to a large extent, it's very South African, right?
South Africa is the biggest and most diverse market, yes.
Yeah, Kasava Republic is doing interesting things in Nigeria. And there's a new one that just came out. We were talking about this the other day, you and I. Leo Zaivev's new novel is published by, I think,
Books and Farms Publishers.
In Abuja is so there's suddenly like Red Sea Press.
Yeah,
there's a resurgence of something.
There is, yeah. There actually there's this great collective, African Books Collective, which essentially it's well, I shouldn't talk about it as if it's new because it's about 30 years old, but essentially sort of connected together with all these disparate presses around the continent, and they have a list of about I want to say 200, presses on the continent. So this is not a small presence. Right. I think that the part of the mission of that collective was trying to bring the books out of the sort of this very places where they were, because as we were saying for a long time, it was all predicated on sort of connection to a metropole, right? And as you said too, in the 70s, it was more of like academic and educational publishers,
university presses and stuff. Yeah,
and so and that's why when the structural adjustment happened, when those sort of budgets were slashed, it was a big problem. But another on the flip side too, that because of the presence of the academic presses, fiction and like the kind of non-academic, I guess, literary work has always kind of sort of had to travel outside in order to get enough. You think of Chinua Achebe literally shipping his only copy of his manuscript of Things Fall Apart to Europe for it to be produced, and I think that is what publishers now are trying to help. And as Sean mentioned, Cassava in Nigeria, which is the one that I've been most excited about. They came out with some wonderful books. I'm thinking of Sarah Ladipo Manyika's books, 100 Wells of Salaga, and a book that we'll review soon, which is Formation, which is kind of a history of Nigeria. Nigerian history has been in the news a lot because of the Benin bronzes and all these and a lot of other issues actually. So that's who I'm most excited about.
Just before we bring in Bhakti Sringapuri, who's also here today, because we wanted to ask her about the project that she's running now, Radical Books Collective. Just tell the viewers quickly and the listeners, like, what are we trying to do with book publishing? How do we want to approach books on Africa as a country?
Yeah, so I think kind of hinted at this a little bit, but we want to focus more on books by publishers on the continent. And so those are the books that we're going to be reviewing and sort of talking to the writers, both about how they came to write a specific books and their experiences. And then we're also doing sort of a series of Q&As about the history of book publishing in the continent itself. So keep an eye out for that. But I do want to say too that we're not sort of throwing away.
No, we're not.
Books that are not by African publishers. And in fact, this book, another book that we'll be reviewing soon is African Europeans by Olivet Hotel, and a great book, Africa's Last Colonial Currency, which was published by Pluto Press, I believe, by Ndongo Sela. So we're kind of, we're focusing on African publishers. That's who our priority is. But of course, obviously want to still keep an eye on the good work that Africans are doing in other publications as well.
I mean, I think the main point here is just to tilt the balance a little bit, because we're not saying, I mean, there's some, like, again, when you said earlier, Cassava Press, I know Bhakti's going to come now and correct us about some history, but I think Cassava published first Chimamander's, I think, first novel. I think they did the first version of it. Similarly, they published the first version of Every Day for the Thief, which later came out in America, like with an American publisher. When they published it, I think it was called the novella. So it's like, there's a lot of silences in this publishing history. We're not trying to say, there's nothing written about this stuff. No, right. These African publishers have existed. They do bring out books. I just think in this moment we live in, we want to make a point of saying, look, it's fine to keep telling you about books that somebody else is reviewing anyway. We would like to show you about a whole bunch of other books that are being published on the continent that you should know about. Yeah.